everyone. I am so glad to be here at the West Virginia Culture Center. My name is Kerry Albright, and I am from Buffalo Creek, West Virginia. So first, I'd like to thank Maria Gano and the Environmental Coalition for asking me to come down from New York City and speak. Maria thought this would be a great time and a great idea to come down because, as she, as well as 5.5 million other readers, saw an article about me in the January edition of Reader's Digest, and it was called The Miracle Baby of Buffalo Creek. So, and it really amazed me for one of the things because a lot of people have really never heard this story or about it, mainly because it came from a time when we didn't have the internet. We didn't have 24-hour coverage like CNN and Fox. So as I got older and I started to read all of the books and the documentaries and the reports on the disaster, I started to notice that my story was never there. And I always found it odd because I was always being reminded about being the miracle baby from the Buffalo Creek community. And this disaster is still in the minds. So all of my life, I thought this story was about me. How they found me, how old I was, and how I made it through this. But the more and more I thought about it, the more I realized this story wasn't as much about me as I thought. This was a story about my father, Robert Albright, and I was merely a part of his story. Now, Robert grew up with the definition of humble beginnings. My dad grew up as the son of a coal miner, and he had 11 brothers and sisters. He used to tell me stories about how he and his brothers would sometimes sleep underneath the house where they grew up, just because of the dirt underneath the house was much cooler, and it was just so hot inside that that's where they decided to sleep. Another story that he told me, and it was one of the rules in the house, was that we always had to keep the overhead lights turned off in our house because when he grew up, all of the lights in his house only had one string hanging down and just the bulb. There was no covering, so the light would always hurt his eyes. So he'd always ask me to shut off all the lights, and we only used lamps. But one story that really stuck out in particular that he always brought up was one time him and his brothers had all gotten together and they decided that they were going to save up all of their money at, from just little odd jobs they were doing around the community. And they were going to save it all up, and they were going to buy their mom a refrigerator. Not a new refrigerator, but a refrigerator. And it was one of those questions I really would have liked to have asked my dad, because even when he was telling me the story, I was really taking a refrigerator for granted. I was like, what were you doing before that? I just can't even fathom what life must have been like for him. But my dad never complained about his life whatsoever. Whenever he just told the stories, he was merely telling me that's the way it was, and so that's the way I basically accepted everything. And he went to school, and he was very happy until he reached the 6th grade, and he told me that it was too embarrassing for him to actually go to school from day to day because he only had one outfit. He said, I didn't have no clothes decent to wear anyway. So after school, he'd race home with his other brothers when they got off the bus, and whoever got home first got to wear the one pair of jeans in the family. And that was a really big deal because you got to wear them for the whole evening. And as I mentioned at the end of this day, this was the big thing for them. And then I found that story kind of very odd in one way and very, cute in another way because as my dad was telling me this, I just remember that as an adult, he wore the same outfit every day anyway. At the end of the day, he would take his shirt off, he would hang it up, he'd take his pants off, he'd neatly fold them, and then place them on the counter, go to bed, and wake up and put on that same exact outfit until that outfit was just simply worn out. Now, my dad knew poverty and swore that he would do better for his family when he had one. So he became a coal miner, and he started off not really knowing anything in 1942. He made very little, but he worked hard, and he became one of their best electricians. So by 1972, he was making $42.80 a day, and he could work as much overtime as he wanted. He married a beautiful woman named Sylvia Bailey, and they had 2 sons named Steve and Terry. Steve was a very talented saxophone player and who had also gotten a scholarship at Fairmont State College. And then there was Terry. Terry, well, let's say he was the rebel of the family. And to give an example of this rebelness, I was told by a very special girl in his life that today I will only refer to as Peggy Sparks Browning. Is Peggy here, by any chance? Okay. Well, Peggy told me that he had an old truck, and it was a really old beat-up truck, but on the side of it, in writing, he had detailed, because it was so rough and beat up, he had written on it, "Don't laugh, your daughter's in here." So that gives you any idea of the rebelness of Terry. That pretty much well sums it up. And but Terry was later drafted into Vietnam, and he did not want to go. This rebel was not happy about it, and at one point he even wanted to run away to Canada. But a lot of people thought the Army was going to be a good thing for this rebel because he needed some discipline, and the United States Army was good for that. Terry kept fighting though. He kept fighting and saying that he was going to run away to Canada. But my dad finally set him down and one day told him that he was going to the Army because it was the right thing to do. So finally, this rebel bowed down to the words of his father, and he agreed to go. Even though he knew, and when I say that he knew, several people have told me this before, that he really knew that he wouldn't be coming back. And he didn't have a fear of going, he had a fear of returning. So Terry was murdered in Vietnam by a fellow soldier, and rather than recall what I was told, I would like to read a letter to you that I received a few years ago from Terry's best friend who stood beside him in Vietnam the day that he was murdered. He was really afraid that the government was trying to cover up what had actually happened to him, that there was a conspiracy, and he was having trouble remembering Terry's face, so he wanted a photo for me to send him so he could remember. But this was the letter that he sent to me. It said, the platoon stopped to do some maintenance on our vehicle. Terry and I were working on our tank and decided to go to the road where some Vietnamese girls were selling beer and soda pop and get us something to drink. Terry was in country before I was, so I kind of picked him as my teacher to show me the ropes. I was in country for only 4 months at the time. Anyway, we walked to the road and left our rifles at the tank. But it was supposed to be fairly secure where we were. We were talking to one of the girls when she gave Terry a yellow towel, which we thought was pretty cool, being that we were basically covered in green all the time. Shortly after, the GI came up to me and Terry and told Terry he wanted the towel. Terry told him no, and we went back to talking to the girls. The GI cussed at Terry, and Terry told him in no certain terms again, with a few cuss words this time, to leave him alone. The GI then told Terry to give him the towel or he was going to blow him away. Being that the term was used every day and we didn't pay it any mind, it told him to get screwed and went back to talking to the girl. The GI then selected Otto on his M16 and fired several rounds into Terry. I watched Terry fall, and the GI then turned the rifle on me and said, "You're his friend, you're next." I don't know what I said to the guy, but he didn't shoot me. I don't know what happened after that. I can't remember how or who stopped him, no matter how hard I tried. I feel like I should have done something to stop it. I'm sorry. Terry was a good man, and he didn't deserve to die that way. Rudy. Now, the Army actually did inform us of this story. There was no conspiracy, there was no lies, and his death was listed as a homicide. Needless to say, this devastated my father, so he never really got over the fact that it was his demands as his father that he went. I remember every year on Terry's birthday, I could see my dad staring blankly at the floor. And I could see that he was concerned. But as a child, I didn't understand those emotions just yet. But he'd always pause from that stare and look at me and say, you know, he wanted to go to Canada. That's where he wanted to go. So after Terry's death, it was brought to my mom and dad's attention that a cousin was pregnant and had decided that she was not going to be able to care for the child. Robert and Sylvia had always wanted a third child and thought this might be the time to have this for the addition. So I was adopted and named Kerry, after my brother Terry. My dad told me that they had signed the adoption papers before I was even born, and he said, so no matter what you came out looking like, I was going to have to take you. Okay, Dad. So, as a baby, from what I heard, that was really cute. And I was just this perfect little blonde angel that was sent from the heavens above. They were obsessed over me, even Steve, the 17-year-old son. They said he used to carry me around all the time, just showing me off to everyone, saying, this is my baby brother. Everything was getting better, and life was slowly coming back from the shock of Terry's death. Steve had received a scholarship at Fairmont and was about ready to go to school. But the rains had started, and the concert that he was supposed to attend ended up getting rained out. But my family was okay with it because, they didn't stop them. They'd said, oh, we're just going to stay at home and that we are going to have a family night. One second. So everything was absolutely great. But then, as they were sitting there having the family night and everything was going wonderful and, having laughs, playing games, all of a sudden they heard some car horns and some people screaming. So Terry went outside to investigate. And what he saw was a 20-foot black wall of water coming at him. Now, I'd like to stop for a moment and just point something out. Just 5 seconds ago, I was talking to you about how my brother was on a scholarship for college, how my mom and dad were slowly recovering from Terry's death, and they had this wonderful new bundle of joy in their lives, me. Then in the blinking of an eye, life changed. It changed because this is what happens when a dam breaks. When a dam breaks, you basically live in front of its path. You don't get to make a quick call. You don't get to grab a bag. You do the only thing that you can do, and that's run. So this is exactly what my mom and brother did. They were running with me to get to higher ground on the mountainside. Some people had already made it, and they were screaming for my family to make it as well. The beginning of the wave of the water had risen above their ankles, and they could no longer pick up their feet. Mainly because of the force of the water itself, and also for the fact that the water was a black sludge that created a suction and made it very difficult for them to even lift their feet. They knew that they were not going to make it. There was no time left. So without hesitation and a last-moment effort, they counted to 3 and threw me, as 9 months old, as far as they could to the mountainside. Even with every ounce of life they had left, it was still not enough to get me to the safety, and the water took all 3 of us with it. This is how I lost my mother and brother. After I was separated from them, it was just me, the millions of gallons of black muddy water that carried me, and God. I'm 9 months old, and I'm being dragged away by the tsunami of chemicals, debris, and negligence. The raging water was so powerful that it would pick up houses and just crush them. Some people could seem literally be riding on the tops of their houses as the water took them away. After the wall of water had passed and the ground could be seen by the people of Buffalo Creek, and they immediately started to look for survivors. But they didn't expect to find anyone, because who could really just survive a disaster that crushed your home, that carried your car away, and left the entire community covered in a black chemical-based sludge? But they looked anyway. And it was the preacher and his son, the Vanovers, as they were wading through the filth. The son told his father that he thought he heard a baby cry, but both of them agreed that a baby couldn't survive this, that what you heard must have been a cat, or it must have been some animal that was just crying. But they looked anyway. Then they saw what appeared to be the leg of a baby doll sticking out of the mud. They grabbed the doll's leg and pulled it from underneath the thick mud, but they didn't pull out at all. They pulled out a 9-month-old baby, and they found that baby because they looked anyway. If there's anyone that has set an example in my life on how to walk in blind faith, it was the Vanovers. They walked blindly, and yet they were guided. But I'm by no means safe yet. They saw my mouth was packed with mud, so I had no way to breathe. They immediately carried me to Catherine Gent. Catherine Gent was a nurse that just happened to be there. She just happened to be my mother's first cousin, and she also immediately took me from their arms and started to forcefully clear my throat. I had the privilege of speaking to Catherine a few months ago at her home, and I got to hear her tell me the story firsthand at 92 years old. And when she got to the part of the story where she took me from their arms, I saw a new person emerge from this sweet 92-year-old woman. Her voice deepened, and she said, "I took you and I started getting everything out of your mouth. I had to force my 2 fingers down your throat, and I just kept pulling out what looked like oily seaweed. It was just strings and strings of junk. I had no clue what that actually was. After that, she had to make a bandage from bed sheets to hold my right leg on. She said the debris had cut it down to the bone, and it looked like my leg looked like a piece of butchered meat. Plus, she was very worried because through all of this, I never made a sound. I wasn't crying, I wasn't moving. I just quietly lay there as she worked on me. She never even knew who I was. I was covered in this black oil, and I was just simply unrecognizable to my mother's family, even though I was her first cousin's child. Now, my dad just happened to be working in the hotel shift when all of this took place. He told me he was about a mile down in the hole and was riding a belt out when all of a sudden the power went out. He was confused because he didn't hear anything, and that suggested that there was not a problem. But he felt he needed to go ahead and crawl out the rest of the way. So he crawled out of that hole the entire time, and then when he got to the top, he could see the looks on people's faces. And he knew what had happened. He knew that the rest of his life that he had worked so hard for was most likely gone as well. He had just lost Terry in Vietnam. Now he has lost his entire family. He feels like he's lost everything. He feels like he's lost it all. But even though he felt like he lost it all, he climbed over a mountain anyway. When he finally got there, what he saw was nothing. There's nothing there. But in that nothingness, he still asked, "Has anyone seen my family?" No one had an answer. But a neighbor finally said, "I think your baby may be alive." But since I was still covered in that thick sludge, no one could identify me. He finally made it over to the small room I was in, and he saw me in the arms of my Aunt Patty. And when my Aunt Patty was there, when she stepped into the room, she immediately knew who I was, and she said, "That's my sister's baby." And then she looked at my dad and she said, "Robert, I can't get him to cry. And I'm still trying to get this black stuff out of his mouth." That's when my dad, without saying a word, he leaned over, gently picked me up, and softly kissed my cheek. And that's when I started to cry because I knew I was safe in the arms of my father. So we got into my Uncle Larry's truck, and he created a road for us, the travel line. He got as far down in the holler as he could, then they put me into an emergency vehicle that got me to a hospital, and in that hospital, it took them 3 days to finally get my legs sewn back on, to have all of the cuts put back up, and my father never left my side, even though he was still in the filthy mine clothes that he started off in. He simply chose to stay. Now, a few days later, my dad went to a makeshift morgue in Southland Grade School to identify the bodies of my mother and brother. They were found 800 yards from our home, and we moved into a FEMA trailer and then lived in Ackerville Hollow till I was almost 5. That's when he decided to take that trailer and place it exactly where our house once stood. He said, "I was born and raised here, and I will die here." So my father never returned to the mines after that day, and he decided he was going to raise me by himself, and he was going to be just fine doing it. He later told me, "I had to learn how to cook, I had to learn how to clean, I had to learn how to sew, I even had to learn how to rock you to sleep at night." And so in 1972, my father became a single parent, stay-at-home dad, and he was proud of his newfound domestic skills. Later on, people started to ask him why he hadn't remarried, and he always had a kind answer. And then one day someone came in and asked the question, and I guess the question just kind of rubbed him the wrong way this time, because he stopped and he looked at that lady in the eye and said, I don't want to remarry because I don't want someone else coming in this house trying to tell me how to live my life, and I definitely don't want someone else coming in this house and trying to tell my son how to live his. Now, needless to say, that lady left, and I don't think I really saw her too much after that. But my dad later on looked at me, and in his very soft voice, he always told me, you can be who you want to be, you can do who you want to, you can do what you want to do, and you can go where you want to go. I thought this was great advice, because this is one of the things I didn't really quite remember, and it's a story that I really didn't know, so I was just kind of thinking about these things. And when he said, you can do what you want to do and be where you want to be, go where you want to go, I started thinking about it, and I started just thinking about this obsession I had with Wonder Woman, and how absolutely awesome I thought she was. Now, I don't know if you know this about Wonder Woman, but she could stop a bullet cold. She could stop a war with love. And she'd make a liar tell the truth. And she did all this in an invisible jet. She'd just fly around making liars tell the truth. And I thought, you know what, that's something I want to do. I want to have my own jet, and I want to fly around making liars tell the truth. What a great idea. So I thought if I was going to do this, that I was probably going to do one of those boomerang headbands that she had, because I was going to need to protect myself, because I would just need protection. And to get one of these boomerang headbands, I thought, I'm probably not going to be able to pick one of those up down at Dixie's Carry Out. So I'm going to have to figure out how to make one myself. So I went back in my room, and I started looking for supplies, how to make this headband, and the only thing I could find was this red construction paper. And that's really all I had. And I can remember standing there just simply, thinking, this is going to work, and I'm going to make that headband. So I got it, and I made that headband, and I was running around that trailer all day, just flowing it and throwing it. I was just protecting the trailer from all the possible evil that could be coming. And my dad, he never batted an eye. He was just happy to see that his son was fighting for the truth. And so he was happy with that. But even then, I kind of knew that I probably shouldn't be walking up and down Buffalo Creek wearing my new headband with magical powers. That probably wouldn't, go over too well. So I thought maybe I should keep this secret identity a secret for right now. But once, I remember I was walking around the camp, and everybody was there, and so I went up to the other kids, I was like, hey, Becky, Ginger, Tamas, here, what are y'all doing? I'm like, oh, we're just talking about what we want to be, what job we want to have when we grow up. And basically, all the girls were saying things like that they wanted to be, like, a nurse or a teacher, and all the guys were talking about how they wanted to, go to work in the coal mines, and they all wanted to drive the truck, everybody wanted to drive the truck. Then there was me, and I just thought about it, and I was like, well, I was planning on flying around in a jet, kind of, fighting for truth, justice, and the American way, but now it appears that I'm going to have to get a job. And so I had to think about it, and I was like, what am I going to do? Like, I don't know what job I'm supposed to be. I didn't have internet. I couldn't really research anything, so the only option I had on Buffalo Creek was to start renting movies. And so I would watch movies like over and over, just countless amounts of movies, thinking like, how am I going to find an answer to this job identity crisis? And so finally one day I saw this one movie. I was like, what? This is it. This is the answer. So I walked right into the living room. I looked at my daddy. I was like, Daddy, I know what I want to be when I grow up. He's like, what would that be, son? I was like, I want to be a professional roller skater, just like Olivia Newton-John did in that movie Xanadu. And my dad just kind of looked at me. And I could see he had a beer in one hand, and then, his forehead just kind of like scrunched up a little right here. And he just went, okay, son, whatever makes you happy. And I was kind of like, you know, I'm sure that he probably thought that this was a phase, but how many of y'all figured out this is probably not a phase? And I was taking this very, very seriously. So I looked around and I was like, I'm going to learn how to roller skate. So I ended up finding a roller skating class in Huntington, West Virginia. And I went every week. And I went constantly. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. And I was practicing constantly until finally I went to Marshall University and was shocked that they did not have a roller skating program. So I decided I was going to become a theater major instead, because, you know, that seemed very logical. So after I became a theater major and I was studying for a while, and Marshall's theater program is wonderful. It was a great program, but they were doing more shows like Our Town, that Shakespeare stuff, and I was kind of looking at it going, this is nothing like Xanadu. And I don't know if you've seen the sets for Our Town, but they're not that impressive. And but one day there was this company that stopped off randomly at Marshall University, and they were hiring people as singers for theme parks. And my friends were like, oh, he's perfect for this. So they pushed me into the room. They just kind of looked at me, and I was kind of like, I don't have a song, I don't have a picture, I don't have a dance, I don't have a resume, but if you want me to do something, I'll do it. Just show me, I'll do it. So they handed me the music to play me some mountain music, but an Oak Ridge voice. I was like, oh, you know, I know that, so I sang it. They immediately loved it. And before I knew it, I was working in New York at a theme park called Fantasy Island. Now, after that, they sent me basically around the world. I spent a few summers in Germany, until one day they gave me the ultimate promotion, and they sent me on a cruise ship, on Carnival Cruise Lines. And I loved every second moment of it. Finally, I was making entrances on elevator lifts. I had 16 showgirls behind me, big old headdresses. I had dance teams on rotating mechanical bulls as I was singing songs like Shameless. And I was like, yeah, this is it. You know, I really, really like this. And then one day I came on stage because I just finished opening for this comedian, and I went to the dressing room and I started pulling off these fluorescent yellow cha-cha sleeves, just threw them on the ground. I was looking at the show boy next to me, and I was like, you know what? I really like this. This is not the dream. My dream was to be on roller skates. And then he looked at me, and he was like, well, why don't you go to Starlight Express? It's on roller skates. And I was like, what? But I thought Starlight Express was on Broadway in 1987, just shortly after 761 performances. And he's like, oh, it did. He goes, but it's still going on in Vegas. And then I was like, oh, well, I gotta get to Vegas. So I quit my job on cruise ships, and I moved straight out to Vegas, and I knew I was gonna get a job instantly, just because I was just thinking weird. So I went straight to the MGM Grand, and they had a multi-million-dollar extravaganza show starring David Cassidy, and that's the show I did not get. However, I did get to be a singer at the MGM Grand in the lobby, and every hour on the hour I'd come out in a bellhop uniform and sing I Think You're Gonna Like It Here from Annie. And then on the half hour, I would come out with a big 2-foot plastic quarter, I'd throw it down, and I'd sing, it don't mean a thing, put 3 coins in that machine, do-la-do-la-do-la-do-la. And then at night, I was a backup vocalist for this guy named Jeff Hudson, and he would make me stand in a cage, and I would sit there in the cage with a machine gun as his backup vocalist, singing, I confess I shot your love down. And then there was fog, just went everywhere. And like, after the fog cleared, it's just gone, I was like, wait, this is not the dream. Okay? I should have been doing this on roller skates. So I figured out when the audition for Starlight Express was coming up, the show that I moved there for, and I saw that there was another show they were auditioning for called Smokey Joe's Cafe. And it was 1 week before the Starlight audition. So I thought, oh, I'll just go to that audition. And then I'll figure out, and I'll sing my song, and that way I'll know if they like it or not, and if they don't like Open Arms by Journey, then I'll know to switch it for Starlight Express. So I go in, and I sing the song, and I didn't think I was going to get this show, because I don't know if you know the show Smokey Joe's Cafe, but there's only one white guy in it, and they were holding the auditions in New York, Orlando, Los Angeles, and Vegas. So what are the chances I'm going to be that white guy? Yeah. So actually, I was that white guy. And they looked at me as they were hiring me, and they were like, "Where are you from?" And I was like, "Buffalo Creek, West Virginia." And he said, "Boy, they sure did teach you how to sing in West Virginia." And I was like, "I grew up Free Will Baptist." And he said, "Oh," he goes, "You're very powerful, very loud." I was like, "Well, I moonlighted with the Pentecostals." So that was all great. So I worked in the show for 13 months. And then they asked me, they were like, "Oh, would you like to do the first European tour?" I said, "Okay, sure." And then after that, they're like, "Would you like to do the South American tour?" I was like, "Yeah, that's fine." You know, pretending like I had somewhere else to go. You know, stay here. But then as that was happening, that show in Vegas for Starlight Express, the dream show on roller skates, closed. So now I was like, well, what am I going to do about this dream? You know, I've had this childhood dream forever. My dad told me I can do what I want to do, go where I want to go, and now there's no place to do this. So I'd gone back to my apartment in New York, and was kind of sitting there, just kind of bored, just kind of gaining weight and hoarding cats. And then my phone rang. And then it was Jeff Hudson, the guy that I was singing backup vocals for in Vegas. He was like, "This is Jeff, and I really want you to come out, and I really want you to fly to Japan and replace me in this show, and you will be a singing ringmaster of Japanese circus." And I was kind of like, you know, I could. It sounds fun because I like, you know, over-the-top stuff, but I was like, no, that's okay, I don't want to do it, because I've done a lot of these shows. And then he said the magic words. He said, "It's on roller skates." And I was like, "I'll be right there." So I picked up my skates, I flew to Australia for 5 weeks of rehearsal, and then I got onto that ship in Japan, and I walked on, and I did that show, and I absolutely loved it. And there was one lyric in that show that I will never forget. And that lyric said, "Think about your childhood wishes." And that's what I did. And I thought about who I wanted to be, and that I could go where I wanted to go, and that I could do what I wanted to do. And as I took that bow, in this hand at the curtain call, I had a 6-foot English showgirl with a 2-foot lollipop. And in this hand, I had a Romanian clown named Snuggles. And as we raised their hands and the confetti cannon shot and the confetti fell on me, I thought about my life and I thought about Buffalo Creek and I thought, yeah, Xanadu. And that's exactly what happened, and I'm so proud of that. So I'd like to thank you all for listening to my story. And I hope to be able to ring around for more questions and stories after that. But one of the things I would like to reiterate, one of the things that I'd like you to concentrate on is to remember, if there is any type of dam that would break in your life, remember you're not going to be able to make a phone call. You're not going to be able to grab a bag and go. You're just going to be able to run. So make sure you stick up for those things and make sure you stick up for the right things. And thank you so much. Thank you.
Jack Spadaro, hang on one second. Jack Spadaro, are you in here? Oh, here he is. Jack Spadaro was an investigator on Buffalo Creek. And I want folks to hear from him. He has a lot of important things to say. Jack has been one of the very few people that has really stood up against the coal companies. Jack has been a very dear friend to me since the coal companies done what they done to me. And yeah, it all started in Buffalo Creek, and I think Jack can say that better than me. Okay, Jack.
I just heard Kerry's whole story this evening. I talked with him at dinner, And he's not just the miracle baby, he's the miracle human being. He's a wonderful human being. And I was just saying, this story he just told you really needs to be a book, a movie, something. His life is remarkable, and I'm really glad to be here with him. So I'm not going to talk very long because I think most of you from the film know what happened on Buffalo Creek. But I do want to say that we still have to be very vigilant about what's happening in the coal fields, from both the problems of flooding created by mountaintop removal operations. There are thousands of people who have had their homes destroyed or severely damaged because of flooding from runoff from mountaintop removal operations. There's still a threat from coal refuse dams that haven't been completely evaluated as far as stability goes. And I'm glad to be a part of all that people like Maria and so many of you here are doing. I'm so glad to be a part of your work, and just want to let you know that we still have very much work to do. But we're making headway, and don't give, realize that we actually are winning this struggle, and we will finally prevail. And thank you for being here tonight with Kerry, and I want to thank him for being here. Thank you.
Well, lo and behold, this is in Harrison County, West Virginia. This happened November the 30th of 2012. And do keep in mind, we have 114 sludge dams, what's classified as sludge dams in the state of West Virginia. Coal companies call them impoundments. I call them sludge dams. It's the same difference. But in reality, they're not impounding anything. It's just flowing over. You'll see here where the orange arrow is pointed. There was a man lost his life. He was working in that area on a dozer, and the impoundment failed. And when it did, the dozer, along with the operator, went into that impoundment. And it took them nearly 2 weeks to find the man. These monsters aren't only unsafe for the people living downstream, it's unsafe for the people that's working on these impoundments. The water, the air coming off of the water, it affects your breathing. I mean, every aspect of this stuff is dangerous. And the next picture, please. Thank you. And this is Brushy Fork. Okay, our governor and our regulatory agency recently permitted this impoundment to become an additional 200,000 gallons, or 200 billion gallons, I'm sorry. I'm looking at Rob Goodwin. Currently, it's permitted to be 6.5 billion gallons of coal sludge. That's billion. Buffalo Creek was 132 million gallons of coal sludge. And our governor and our regulatory agencies just permitted this monster to grow. At its completed stage, it will be bigger, deeper than Hoover Dam. The face of it will be 954 feet tall. Is that correct, Rob?
At the final stage, what they want to do.
And it will hold over 9 billion gallons of coal sludge. Now think about what Buffalo Creek done with 132 million gallons. This monster, and notice along the ridges here, this is not dozing, this is blasting. So there's blasting all along the right-hand ridge here, you can see. And so not only do we have all of this coal waste backed up behind this dam, this earthen dam. This is in Raleigh County, by the way, just upstream from Whitesville, a little ways up from Whitesville. And the governor and the regulatory agencies has permitted it to be bigger. And what we're asking people to do is to call this number and ask our governor to just say no. It's not his life at risk, it's ours. It's the life of our, not only our communities, but the life of our family and our friends and the people around us that we love. And you know, the family members that we lost in Buffalo Creek, my dad had left from our home. I was only 4 years old when this happened, so I don't remember much of it. But one thing I remember is as a child looking up at all the adults in the room, and they were all crying. And I had no idea why. I had no idea what had happened. And knowing now, it helps me to understand just the devastation within our household. It went on for days. We lost 7 people in that flood. It was the Dillon family. The entire family perished in that flood. And you know, there were 7 people. And I'm not sure whether it's listed with the 125 or if it's added on to the 125. But there were 7 people in that flood that was never found. And I don't know how they're accounted for, but I've often thought about those 7 people that never get mentioned. They were never found. So yeah, I often wonder about them. And what we're asking people to do is to please call the governor and tell him, no, we don't need another Buffalo Creek. We don't need another Martin County, Kentucky coal spill. We don't need no more of this. That we have dry press methods. They could dry press this material and store it dry. But it costs the coal companies an additional $1 per ton. I believe that my life and the lives of the people in the coal fields, and I hate that word, I believe we're worth $1 on the ton. And I believe that if we don't force our regulatory agencies and our government to protect our lives will not be protected. These sludge dams will fail today, 41 years after the Buffalo Creek flood. They're not going to come and tell us either. And I know this to be a fact.
Could you explain what that blasting is? Explain that.
Absolutely. That blasting is mountaintop removal coal mining. It's surface mining. Some people call it mountaintop mining. It's basically mountaintop removal mining. They're taking the surface off so that they can get to the coal beneath. And they're doing this beside of this sludge dam, which, I mean, when you think about it, it's insane to have the sludge dam there, knowing people live downstream. And then when you start blasting behind it, this belongs to Alpha Natural Resources, who bought it from Massey Energy. And when you start thinking about the fact that this is looming over your home, that all by itself is enough. But when they start blasting the side of it, and then back here in the back side of it, they push in dry material. So they're constantly manipulating all of this. And it's holding 6.5 billion gallons of coal waste. That's a tremendous amount of material. Looking at what Buffalo Creek done. And we have, the people will not, the people in government and the people in our regulatory agencies will not do what's necessary to protect our lives. That's already been proven. We have to take that step. If I can, I would like to have Kerry and Jack to join me back on stage for a little question and answer. I'd like to get some questions from the audience, if that's okay. Can we get the lights turned up, please? Thank you.
I'm guessing that we're at the top of a hollow looking toward the face of the dam, and that sort of grayish area there is the face, and it's draining out through the dam and the filtrate is going down into the hollow beyond, is that the way it is?
Well, yes, in the foreground is the headwaters of that watershed. To the right is the mountaintop removal mine, the pond in the center, and then sort of in the middle, right under the 304, is the dam itself. So, and this is a common way they build these dams. The problem with this dam and a lot of others is they're building them by building on top of old coal slurry that's already been deposited behind the original dam. And that old coal slurry is wet and it's not very strong material. So there are, most of the dams now being built or added to in this state and in actually this region are being built in that manner with the upstream, in the upstream method. And that is a risky way of building dams because the Buffalo Creek Dam was built on fine coal slurry that had been deposited by 2 previous dams. It was entirely constructed on top of old, wet coal slurry. And that's why when it failed so rapidly. It failed within probably 15 minutes. It was, their original failure mode was in the under part of the dam, there was something called piping happening, and it was a weakening, it was water seeping and flowing through the foundation of the dam and actually eroding the inner part of the dam. And then the dam itself was saturated, so essentially dissolved, it liquefied in a matter of 15 minutes or so. These dams are better. I mean, they have been modified over the years. There's been some engineering analysis done. You know, dams are much safer these days than they were at the time of Buffalo Creek. But nevertheless, what we're seeing is an industry that keeps doing things simply the way they want to. And the regulatory agencies like the Department of Environmental Protection, the Federal Office of Surface Mining, and the Mine Safety and Health Administration are going along with the program and help justify this continued method of coal slurry disposal, when we don't really even need to be doing it. I mean, there are methods, as Maria pointed out, that one can use that have been around since the 1960s, called the dry filter press process. It is a little more expensive, but it does not require a dam. And that's been my argument all along. We don't really even need these structures. And it's time for us to stop using them. Okay.
Other questions?
I have one.
1 second.
The dry process being used in, do you have countries or companies that are using?
Yes, in fact, the dry filter press process was used in the preparation plant at Martin County, Kentucky, actually beginning in the late 1970s up until the 1980s. And the reason we know that it's more expensive to use the dry filter press process is because we took testimony from the president of Martin County Coal and asked him why he stopped using that process and returned to using a dam that eventually failed and sent 300 million gallons of coal slurry downstream. He said, well, we saved $1 a ton in production, and that gave us $1 more profit per ton. And that was their only consideration when they switched. There were many companies using the dry filter process in the 70s and 80s because of the Buffalo Creek disaster. And they changed over time simply because They wanted to make more money and put everybody downstream at risk. And that is as we said in the conclusion in the report that we wrote on Buffalo Creek, that the Pittston Company was guilty of callous indifference to the welfare of people in the coal fields, and that attitude was prevalent throughout the mining industry, and it still is. So that's why we need to keep doing what we're doing.
Here's a question for you, Kerry. I understand you recently, you were written up in Reader's Digest, right, about your story. And can you talk a little bit about your experience coming back here for the interviews? And I think you and I talked just briefly about it at dinner, like when some photo shoots were happening or anything like that.
No, when I came back here, I was amazed that it was going to take 3 days of me standing in the creek to get one shot. It was about 8 hours a day. But so I wanted to tell the people of Buffalo Creek that I was coming, but I also needed to let them know that I had a very set, strict schedule, because I didn't want to appear, like I was rude, because it is Buffalo Creek, and that's like when you come in, you say hello to everyone, and I knew that I was going to be like here and there, and I didn't want to look like I was just like ignoring someone. So I tried to not to make too much fuss about it. So, but I just remember when I was taking even photos by the Buffalo Creek Memorial, then and it was the first photo that I even started taking, and the photographer was, just like was going to take the photos. Then all of a sudden, Krista Brown Trogdon pulls off in the truck, and she's like, "Kerry Albright!" Like she comes straight over, and that was just the beginning of me being identified. Like every 20 minutes, like somebody was coming up, and even when I was at what's the pizza place in Man? Giovanni's? Yeah, there. I was sitting there, I realized my cousin was behind the counter. And then after that, after we finished like 8 hours, and that I'd gotten a phone call at Giovanni's from another cousin that located me and called Giovanni's to ask them to put me on the phone. So it was really interesting, and to see basically how life was pretty much the same on Buffalo Creek in a lot of ways. Not much had changed. There were no new businesses that have really come in. Of course, all the people were absolutely wonderful. I did notice there was this weird ladybug infestation at the church. They were everywhere, and I'd never seen that before, so I don't know what that was all about. But but it was really great just to be able to go back and to see where I grew up. But when you go back to Buffalo Creek, it's kind of like you never left, because the spirit of the people is the same, and everybody knows you, and it's not like someone hasn't seen you in 20 years, even if they haven't. It's just like they were speaking with you yesterday. So that's one of the brilliant things about always going back there, because you're always family, you're always home. So I loved it.
I have a question for Kerry. How does it make you feel when you hear that they want to enlarge something like the Brushy Fork impoundment?
When I hear things like that, the first thought is just, really? Because what gets me sometimes, and it depends on what side that it comes from. Like when I hear him speaking about all the things that he's done to help prevent something like this from happening again, I'm like, that's awesome, that's great. But then when I hear like a coal company side of it saying the same exact thing, I'm like, it's like, that's the same thing everybody always says. And it's like I could finish the speech for them, because it's just the same words over and over. And I've actually been interviewed for other situations like Hurricane Katrina when the levees broke. And it was the same exact story that I heard from the people who had built them. They're like, well, we're going to get in there to see exactly what happened to ensure that this never happens again. And then they do the same exact thing, and then they try to do, cut corners to make it as cheap as possible. And then they just throw out the words. So when I hear when they're trying to enlarge an impoundment or things like that, I'm like, it didn't work the first time. And you run around all this time talking about what we've learned from Buffalo Creek on the more the corporation side.
what they've learned about it, and then how they're going to do these things. And it's just words after a while, because I'm like, isn't it basically still made out of dirt, and you're building it like taller than the Hoover Dam, like dirt? I mean, we've all taken water and poured it on dirt. We know what happens. I mean, you can only pack it so hard for so long before something's going to happen. I mean, it's just like asking for it and then expecting people to accept it. And I'm just like, well, I have common sense, you know, that's not going to work out. So that's how I kind of feel about that.
Right back there, and in the back, and then I'll come to you.
I called the phone number. A lot of us know the young ladies that work in the governor's office, and it's their job to answer the phone, and they're real nice, and they write down what you say properly and whatever. But I only did it once, and it seems like it would help if all of us in this room called every day. It might take us 1 minute or 2 minutes. And Jack, I'm so glad to be in the same room with you, Mr. Spadero. You're one of my heroes, and I'm really glad to finally meet you face to face. My mother worked at DNR, Marilyn Mason, and she read the book, Something's Rising.
Something's Rising, yeah.
And she said, I know that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
We hold you in reverence, and it's really, really good to meet you. I was out here at the Capitol at Memorial Day with some of you, and I got my head shaved and grown out. But I took a stand then against mountaintop removal, and I talked to people around me about it. I keep telling people I'm just a normal person. I just know this is not right, what's going on in West Virginia. And so my mother and these other women joined what we call the Little Old Ladies who love our land, is what we sometimes call it, but sometimes we call it the Little Old Ladies Against Mountaintop Removal. It depends upon, you know, who we're talking to, what mood we're in. I want to pledge that I'm going to get 6 other people to pledge to call every day. Call the governor's office every day, and if they change the phone number on us or something, Maria, just give me a call, and I'll tell my 6 people, but we're going to call every day and tell them that we need them to change the ways that they're doing this. All it's going to take is a little earthquake.
That's right.
And then we can't say, well, we said we weren't going to let it happen again. You know, so we're going to call them on them repeating themselves one time too many. Let's put an end to it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great idea. Go ahead.
Jack, this is something I'm sure you know about, but I'll just point out that there's kinds of earth that are sort of semi-stable, and when suddenly an earthquake hits, they turn to watery gel and just pieces of land that you think have been there for thousands of years, and where would they go? Suddenly just turn to slush and go sliding. And what's here is a mixture of heavier material and very light coal fines, if I understand correctly.
That's right.
And the water just sort of trickles through it. We've all been at the beach and made a little pond, maybe. We fill up the water behind it, and at a certain point, the water starts to trickle through it, and then the whole thing washes away. Isn't that what it feels like?
It dissolves, yes, yeah. Well, and that's why I have talked quite a bit about not building these structures any higher and using this method, because it's really stretching the limits as far as any kind of long-term stability. And especially if you have an added factor, and that is the earthquake factor. And so they do analysis, supposedly, theoretical analysis that say, oh no, everything's safe. But some of these dams have really high pressure showing up in the instrumentation that's being done. So we know there's something wrong with that. Yes?
I'm wondering.
That was there every single day when they were building this thing at FAR, this guy Paul McCombs, that was in the engineering office with the guys that signed off on the plan for the ventilation plan at Upper Big Branch. And so basically all of the information and all of the determinations that the regulators use to approve expansions and improve that the dam is safe, essentially are based on the fact that this, engineer Paul McCombs, like every 7 days, was writing, accurate and truthful reports and monitoring and information that they properly compacted the material, at Brushy Fork. We're being truthful, and honest, and there wasn't another set of books out there that had other information that things didn't go as planned. So I think that's something to consider. So on top of that, one of the issues that we've raised specific objections to this expansion is that the compaction that methods that they've been using on these dams over the past several years are incredibly questionable. I think one could say that they shouldn't be using bulldozers, which are essentially a machine that's used to not sink into the soil and just move soil. They should be using rotary compactors like you see at a landfill, to compact the material to make a stable foundation for building the dam bigger. Don Blankenship built this dam, and they weren't doing that. There's dozens and dozens of violations at which MSHA inspectors came in there and found that they were when the regulations were pushing a lift of refuse in there at 1 foot. They were at one point found to have a 30-foot lift of refuse that can't actually be compacted. And so, those are some things to consider. Currently, one thing that we've kind of asked, made the argument that both the state of West Virginia DEP and Federal Office of Surface Mining are currently doing a study as to whether the methods and the compaction that's existing on these dams is sufficient. And we don't necessarily know the results of this study. However, we do know that when OSM was ready to kind of release their report and go forward, West Virginia DEP had some objection to it and whatnot. And it's been 2 years since they've kind of done this testing, and they have refused to release any information at all to the public. And Brushy Fork was one of the dams that they studied. And so I think one of the specific asks here is that the DEP actually hasn't, they claim that any day now they're going to approve this. They actually haven't approved it. Is that we think that before they approve an expansion, at least finish the study that is going to possibly determine whether this dam was built correctly thus far. So that's a lot.
Actually, in the analysis, somewhere near 80% of the compaction tests failed the standard, and that study has been suppressed by the managers in the Federal Office of Surface Mining, because both the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection and the Federal Mine Safety and Health Administration, which also regulates these dams, has objected to the results because they don't fit neatly into their statements that all these dams are being built properly. And that study has been in existence for at least a year and a half, maybe 2 years, and it still has not been released to the public, which is the same thing that happened on Buffalo Creek. There were 6 government agencies that had examined or written reports saying that the Buffalo Creek Dam was unsafe. Not one of them did anything to correct it, and many of those studies did not come to light until the dam failure occurred. So we have the same thing now, a collusion really, amongst the 3 agencies that are responsible for this, these safety programs, and that's the Federal Office of Surface Mining, the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection, and the Federal Mine Safety and Health Administration.
I need to point out that Rob works with Coal River Mountain Watch, which is an organization in Whitesville, and we work with Coal River Mountain Watch on the sludge safety project up until recently. And one of the victories we managed to have was a moratorium on slurry cell injections. So this is we work in cahoots, is how it's called.
Moratorium on what? Moratorium on what?
Injection.
Sure, slurry, there's a ban on moratorium on slurry injection underground, into underground mines, yeah.
Has anyone ever done a worst-case scenario on this particular dam? If it failed, what would happen?
Well, that's what they're required to do by law, actually, is like under a 100-year flood, they're required to do like a worst-case scenario analysis on like what stability. But yeah, I guess what you're asking a worst-case scenario, like in the event it does fail, when it's failing.
What would
Yeah,
happen?
it was like a 40-foot, tall of water from Whitesville, 20 miles downstream, all the way to Peytona. And, I mean, that's thousands of people that live in the floodplain there, and that's an analysis that's actually recorded right in the permit. And one of the, I think, frustrating things is that regardless of whether it's built absolutely correctly with even the best engineers, we picked and chose the engineers, regardless of what happens, the way that they're built, they're still classified as a high hazard dam, and there's some sort of risk of failure, which obviously should be illegal for the coal industry to unwillingly put anybody at risk of failure. And so that's every more reason for them to take the most conservative engineering approach as possible when they're doing this dam. And one thing that we've asked is I've sent a letter a couple days ago to DEP kind of asking a meeting with citizens and whatnot before they approve it, because they're able to get around without a public comment period and whatnot. But, and they haven't responded yet. But one of the things I asked, and I said, well, you've got this compaction testing study done, is why don't you just, model worst case scenario, the worst results from that, and, model the whole dam and see whether it's safe or not, and rather than, beating around the bush. And I don't know, we haven't gotten a response yet.
Any more questions? Okay. Well, that's right, no. Okay, hang on, I got a question back here, I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
My question is for Kerry. Is your dad still with us, and has he been able to, or was he able to see any of your shows?
He passed away in 2000 from black lung and throat cancer. But anytime I would go anywhere, his big thing was always just send me photos. So I'd always send him photos of everything. And that's basically, so he would only see me in shows if they were at the Aracoma Story, where I was doing everything there, but he never traveled outside. He'd only left the state twice in his entire life, and once was when his brother was sick, the other time was when his brother passed away. I remember that because when I had to go to the funeral, and he pulled out these instructions out of his wallet, how to get there. And it was clearly back roads instructions. I'm like, Dad, these are like 20, I'm sure this, was before they had like interstates and highways that went directly there. But I didn't want to say anything, so those were the directions I followed. Went right there. But yeah, he didn't, or I would make videotapes of the shows I was in, and I would send it to him that way. Yeah.
Any more? Okay, I want to say thanks to everybody involved. I want to say thanks to OVEC, and yeah, I'm a little partial. And also I want to say thanks to Mimi Pickering.
Mimi Pickering.
Yeah. Oh, Diane's got me preoccupied back here. She's putting on her own little show back here. But we have an information table over here. And what this is, it's got our newsletters, there's membership information, there's lots of membership, or lots of information over here. And y'all think you're a tough crowd. I had 3 classes of upper high schoolers today too, so y'all's an easy crowd. But yeah, it was interesting. But grab you some of this, and also our website is ohvec.org. There's lots of information there. Specifically on sludge, there's sludgesafety.org. There's a lot of information, more information in those 2 websites than any human mind can absorb. So yeah, and I've tried, so. And thanks everybody for coming out, and I look forward to.
Thank these 2.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, thank you, Kerry, and thank you, Jack, so much for joining us today. And thank you so much for making the drive. So thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.